Hi everyone, I'm Nevio. I am a member of the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Research in Southeastern Europe, which is the main partner with the Davis Center on this fellowship. I'm here today to present you the mapping of the Holocaust in the independent state of Croatia. This is a web page or a project, basically started by three of our members, of whom you will all meet. So this is basically a digital tool to understand the Holocaust in the fascist independent state of Croatia, as well as the Jewish history and communities that were unfortunately, a part of the Holocaust in the independent state of Croatia. This is an ongoing project. New locations, documents, and numerous other materials will be added. But there are many different ways to approach this tool. You have these teams. So currently there are 10 teams ranging from perpetrator perspective, victim perspective, for example, gender history, how the systemic violence happened, and so on. We also have a map here, just a second, which is basically it looks a bit bare right now, but as I said, the map will be updated as the new materials come in. So basically, this is the map of the former independent state of Croatia, and if you use this tool right here, swipe button, you can swipe and compare the current borders of all of Croatia and its surrounding states and how it looked like in the period of the independent state of Croatia. As you can see, so the what is this red brownish color marks the concentration camps, and the blue and white are the cities or communities we put it here that are notable and are currently we have documents for them. And again, this will be updated. So I will just briefly run through all of these, all of the documents and everything you have available to approach the Holocaust to approach your research for the Holocaust in the independent state of Croatia. So there were numerous camps, but we currently have the most notable one, the Jasenovac. So Jasenovac was basically a camp complex. As it says, it's a complex made out of numerous camps, and the complex Jasenovac 3, the camp Jasenovac 3 was the main camp. As you can see, it's marked here. As you go through this web page, you can see that the planning for the complex camp began in late July 1941, so three and a half months into the existence of the independent state of Croatia. You have also here a overview of the camp itself, how it evolved, and how it basically ended up. So it was operational until April of 1945. We also have source documents here on numerous perspectives. So you have legal decrees about forced internment. You have testimonies of the guards. You have testimonies of those imprisoned. And for this presentation, I chose to, like I said, there are numerous, and you can approach this from many aspects. From each document tells its own story. For example, if you look at this expert from an article in the Ustasha Press, this is the original document in Croatian, but for the English-speaking fellows, you can just click here and you have the translated version. And you also have a context. And basically, this is you can approach this as a like an insight of how the propaganda machine worked in the independent state of Croatia, but it also tells a story that Jasenovac's camp was in one certain aspect, different from the concentration camps in the SS concentration camps in the Nazi Germany, because the people did not bear any external marks that will label them as convicts or prisoners. They could have their own clothes that they were brought in the camp, or they were just given some random rags. So, okay, now you can ask yourself, how did the people end up in Jasenovac? And then you can go to this here, the communities. We currently have, as I told you, 4 communities. For example, let's take Osijek. Osijek is one of the 4 biggest cities in Croatia, the 4th biggest one. And it's positioned right here, so on the far east of the current Croatia, Republic of Croatia. You also have a brief overview of Osijek. And what is interesting about Osijek is that it was one of the unique places at stake here, where the Jewish minority faced 3 fascist movements at the same time. So the German Nazis, the Croatian Stashas, and the Hungarian Arrow Cross. And each of these fascist movements tried to use the Jewish community for their own personal gain, for the gain of their own cause. In this also you can see here how the deportations started. Osijek also had its own ghetto, Tenja. And now you want to see, well, how did the people react? So we have a excerpt from the Otto Langfelder. His story is interesting because he was like in the August of 41, he was deported to Gospic, one of the first camps in the NDH, in the independent state of Croatia. And this details how he was transported and the horrible conditions of the train wagons by which he was deported to Gospic. It's also interesting for him, as the context provides. He also survived Jasenovac and participated in the breakout on April 1945, which is one of the more interesting personal experiences of Jewish members of the Jewish communities and how they survived. Now you've seen this, and you can also ask yourself, well, what was the woman's role in this? And we have a petition by Aryan, quote-unquote, women protesting the persecution of their Jewish husbands. So basically, these were the women used the, as you can see here, the regime's language, and they instrumentalized it to try and set their husbands free, or for them not to be prosecuted. So, for example, Aryans, no one used Aryans, but this was the language of the state, and they tried to reason with the state on how to, on which basis they should free their husbands or not to prosecute them, because they were, like this says, they were married in Catholic Church, and basically with that marriage they were converted. And also, if you now want to look at the other roles of women in the independent state of Croatia, you can go here on the main page under Themes, Gender History, and you also have this petition, but also this is a bit more brutal, a testimony from Maja Buždon, one of the commanders of the women's section in the Stari Gradiška camp. So basically, this is a testimony where she describes how the killings were done, how many kids were approximately killed, and women, and so on. Once you read this testimony, it would be kind of weird how she so blatantly confesses to her crimes, and then again you go to context and you can see that she was most likely tortured, and that was the way how the confession came out. But this does not exonerate Maja Buždon, because her culpability is confirmed by numerous other testimonies. So the context provides as it says, the context to each and every document, and it kind of provides a whole picture. I'm at the end of my presentation, and just to get you to know the team behind this project, Lovro Kralj, he has a lecture today, Emil Kierte, and Daniel Matijevich. Daniel will have his lecture the next month, and the Emil's lecture will be the month after. My role in this fellowship is to provide you with documents or any sources that you might need or are interested in. And you can contact me via Basecamp, or I can share my email in this chat, or Sandra can also, or Alina, do that as well. I will most likely be present on all of the, if not all, then many of the lectures, and you can also contact me that way. I hope this was interesting, and I hope you will use this tool, and this tool will be useful to you. And as Sandra said, I'm really glad to see so much of you here, and I hope, yeah, you will be satisfied with this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nevio. If you don't mind just sharing the link to the resource in the chat.
Yeah.
We do have it also on our websites, but it would be good. And before I move into introducing Lovro Kralj for today, I just want to say that there will be a session in February where Nevio and I will meet with all of you, and this would be a great time. So we'll have the whole 90 minutes for you to, if you can't find a particular document, or if you want a particular topic but can't find the document, we'll be there to assist you. You, of course, can always send us an email. And I do want to thank the team for creating this resource. It was this resource that essentially gave us the idea to do this fellowship, to share it with the broader community of educators so that you can create resources both for your classrooms, but also for others. And again, we'll talk more about that. So thank you, Nevio. And I think we're about ready to get started with the first lecture. So I'll just go ahead and briefly introduce our speaker today. So our first opening session will be led by Lovro Kralj. He's a historian who specializes in the research areas of fascism, anti-Semitism, genocide, and the Holocaust, with a regional focus on Central and Southeast Europe. He completed his doctoral studies in 2023 at the Central European University. The title of his doctoral dissertation is Paving the Road to the Holocaust in the NDH, Anti-Semitism in the Ustasha Movement, 1930 to 1945. Kralj has participated in more than 20 international conferences, seminars, and workshops, including Lessons and Legacies, the world's most prestigious Holocaust conference. Since 2022, he's employed at the Department of History, University of Rijeka, where he also coordinating several international projects related to the history of the Holocaust. In January 2024, he helped co-found the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Research in Southeast Europe at the University of Rijeka, where he is serving as the center's first director. So without really any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Lovro and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and also thank you, Nevia, for explaining our research so well. You've done it better than I could probably. So just one more thing to add. New materials will really be added as we speak. So by February, when you're going to meet about the resource and so on, there should be really a lot more locations available. So it's really an ongoing work. I'm really happy to be with you. I'm very excited about this presentation and this whole process that we are participating in, and also the collaboration between the interaction between the Croatian educators and the US educators from the US. I think is really such a major success. So I'm really happy to be a part of this story. So my presentation today will be about the Holocaust in Southeastern Europe and to place it in comparative perspective. So I'll talk more about the importance of the region of Southeast Europe as such, particularities of each country or three countries, namely. I'll explain which ones and why, and also how Croatia, which is the topic of my very specialized research, fits into it and what is the importance of it. So the Holocaust in Southeast Europe fits into thinking about it regionally and analyzing it and educating about the Holocaust in regional terms fits into the most recent spatial turn in Holocaust studies. So for the last few years, this has been more at the forefront of both education and research, and we talk about it more and more in terms of scholarly publications and so on. And the spatial turn basically means that we should include thinking about space and geography much more into our understanding of various historical processes. And in that context, we have kind of charted out, the scholarship has charted out the key differences in this regional way of thinking. And some of them include juxtaposing, for example, the Holocaust in Western Europe versus the or the Holocaust in Eastern Europe. For example, Western Europe was not a site of major genocidal killing. It was not a site of major pogroms. It was a site of a crime because Jews were deported, they were discriminated, they were exposed to various types of persecution. Mass murder in Western Europe was a rather rare phenomenon. So the victims were brought to the East, and Eastern Europe is seen rightfully as an epicenter of that murderous process because that was the location where the majority of death camps were located. That was the location where Jews from all over Europe were brought to be killed. But it was also a site which was starkly different from Western Europe in certain aspects. For example, in Nazi line of thinking and in Nazi imagination, Eastern Europe was, of course, supposed to be a part of the German Empire's idea of the living space, or Lebensraum, as they called it. So through that line of thinking, Eastern Europe was also not supposed to be a place where you would find any sort of newly created states or semi-independent, independent states, and so on. So it was designed to be part of German colonial project without any rights for the local population. And here comes in Southeast Europe, which stands really in between these two juxtaposition of West and East Europe. And it's a particular place because we find a highest level of semi-independent satellite puppet regimes in a very confined geographic space on a European level. Moreover, it is the Southeast European space, which is extremely important because it offers a plethora of different perpetrators who participated in the Holocaust and implemented the Holocaust largely autonomously from Nazi Germany. So historians now estimate that up to 10% of all of the victims of the Holocaust, so approximately 600,000 people, were not killed by German Nazis, but mostly by regimes implementing the Holocaust autonomously, namely independent state of Croatia and Romania are two such regimes. Next to Nazi Germany, it's actually also independent state of Croatia and Romania as the two only regimes on a European level which killed their own Jewish citizens on the territory of their own states, in their own concentration camps, and through their own perpetrators. So they did not mainly outsource the crimes such as Hungary, Slovakia, and many other countries which deported their Jewish population into German concentration camps. Romania and Croatia are the two countries which kind of dealt with the implementation of the crime in their own terms, in their own territories. And therefore, Southeast Europe is also usefully seen as a laboratory for examining different types of authoritarian regimes and rules. Because Croatia was governed by a fascist regime, Romania was governed by an authoritarian dictatorship, Bulgaria was ruled by a royal dictatorship. So we also have a plethora of different kind of political organizations participating in the same event. But we can also see how these different regimes, different structures of power impacted the implementation of violence as well. And finally, why Southeast Europe is also important is because of the diverse Jewish communities which lived in it, some dating their history numerous centuries, such as the Sephardic communities, which escaped persecution from Spain and Portugal and settled on the territories of then Ottoman Empire or Venice and so on and so forth. And also we have the Ashkenazi Jewish communities, which settled through migration from the Russian Empire or from Germany or from Austro-Hungarian Empire into these lands, which are now Southeast Europe. Just to give you a notion of the map, and Southeast Europe, like any other imagined geographic entity, is notoriously difficult to define because it's not an objective thing which exists in history. It's always a matter of interpretations of which countries do belong or do not belong to it. And here you can see roughly the states which would fall under Southeast Europe, which is Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, and Yugoslavia. So it was a home to more than 1 million Jews, the region of Southeast Europe. How do we define it? Southeast Europe is, as I said, notoriously difficult to define because some people define it geographically. If we go down that road, it is a geographic space kind of between the 3 seas. So we have the Adriatic Sea here, Ionian Sea here, and Aegean Sea here. And on the top would be river Danube would be the separation line in terms of a geographic space. But then politically or historically, sometimes it's also defined as the extent in the south of Europe of the reach of the Ottoman Empire. So some people would also include Hungary into it, for example. But for the purpose of this presentation, it does not make much sense. So let's go into some of the case studies and see sort of the particularities. We're going to discuss Romania and Bulgaria and then transition into the case of Croatia. So Romania is a very interesting country in the history of the Holocaust because in some ways it fits perfectly into what the mainstream scholarship is all about, and in some ways it does not fit at all. The way it does fit is that Romania is one of the most anti-Semitic countries in 20th century Europe. It is actually the last country in Europe which emancipated or gave full citizen rights to its Jewish population in 1923. And it's also a country with a plethora of anti-Semitic laws ranging from the mid-19th century going all the way up until, of course, 1945. So Romania is also quite interesting in juxtaposition to Bulgaria and Croatia because it's a winner. It's a winning country in the First World War, unlike Bulgaria, for example, which has lost a lot of its territory. Romania has doubled its territory after the First World War. In purple, you can see the Romanian kingdom in pre-World War I borders. And of course, everything else you can see is after World War I. So the territory of the state has doubled. And with it, also a numerous number of minorities has been included into the new Romanian state post-World War I. It has actually quadrupled the number of minorities. So Romania is an interesting case in the interwar history of Europe of a state which has turned from a monoethnic country where Romanians made 92% of the population into a truly multi-ethnic country where Romanians made 72% of the population. And a lot of that new population were also Jews from Eastern Europe. And this has kind of empowered the local far right and has motivated the local fascist organizations to really demand a re-Romanianization of the country. So the whole idea is we have reached the maximum extent of Romania, of the territories we wanted, but now it's time to make it Romanian in a way. So the policies towards minority really become the main political issue in the entire interwar Romanian history. And for the far right and for the fascists, it's the Jews who are considered the biggest threat. This has been fueled, of course, by the revolution in Russia, which also gave birth to the Judeo-Bolshevik myth, or the idea that communism is somehow invented, manipulated, and controlled by Jews, which is, of course, absolutely not true, but we don't have to get into that in great detail. But this is something that dominates the fascist line of thinking in Romania. And the key fascist movement here is the Legion of the Angel Archangel Michael, or shorthand Iron Guard is also the name given to that movement, which really is born out of the university system. So very often we have the idea of the Enlightenment, that people who go into the university, they receive good education, and this is going to, in a way, increase tolerance, it's going to create good citizens, and so on. What we see in Romania, and we also know from other case studies, is that when people with stereotypes and prejudices, and especially anti-Semitism, enter into that space, the outcome is not necessarily the disappearance of the stereotype, it's a creation of a much more coherent and sophisticated intellectual product of that stereotypization, such as very advanced conspiracy theories and so on. But why it also comes from the universities, the most anti-Semitic movements in the 1920s are focused on the universities, is this obsession with who is going to participate in the building of this new country, with a lot of new countries which are being born after the First World War. So the idea of Romanian fascists is first, let's expel Jews from the universities, because the future intellectual elite of the country, which has to participate in the Romanianization, has to be Romanian. So already here you can see sort of the in-group, out-group way of thinking of who does belong and does not belong to the nation. And the violence from the universities very quickly turns to the streets, and also turns to the political elites. For example, people who have participated in the emancipation of Jews in Romania were killed by students, future members of the Iron Guard, a year later. And one of the leaders of Romanian fascism, Corneliu Codreanu, was in turn also assassinated by the regime, which further escalates the situation in 1938. Eventually, the Iron Guard managed to get into power 2 years later, in the end of 1940, into some sort of a regime which is a hybrid between conservatives, military elites, and also fascists. And all of them are very anti-Semitic. But actually, they end up in almost a civil war. Actually, not almost, but they do end up in a civil war which goes on for a few days. And the core of the conflict between these groups is not whether the country should be cleansed of Jews, quote unquote, but in which method. And here we have a clash of evolutionary and revolutionary approach to the Jewish question. And the Iron Guard, of course, in this case, wants to have a revolutionary approach. It wants to solve the Jewish question through violence in the streets, through pogroms, and activism on the ground, while the more military-oriented wing, led by Ion Antonescu, who was eventually the leader of Romania during the Second World War, is arguing for a much more evolutionary approach through legalist means, through highly organized deportations, through professionals who are going to participate in this process. So the Iron Guard falls out of power in January 1941, but the highly Semitic regime remains, but it wants to implement the Holocaust in a much different way. And this is Romania during the Second World War. The country has lost some territories in the interwar period to Hungary and to the USSR. But in purple, you can see the regions of the old kingdom, which we already mentioned, and some of the territories which Romania managed to gain back after the invasion of the USSR, which are marked in green. And these territories are called Bessarabia and Bukovina. And why these territories are important during the Holocaust in Romania is because the violence against Jews was highly focused on these newly annexed territories. So Jews were not focused for deportations. They were discriminated and mistreated in many different ways, but the territories marked in purple were not the subject of high mass deportations and cleansing, but only the newly annexed territories. This is very important for the later discussions, which we are going to have. This being said, we should not really underestimate the amount of suffering and the mass murder that Romania has conducted during the war. Between 300 and 4,000 Jews in Romania were murdered during the Second World War, and also Romania was one of the pioneers in the implementation of the Holocaust, first through pogroms and then through deportations already in the summer of 1941. But surprisingly or interestingly, it's also one of the first countries which aborts the deportations to the east. And maybe to make this a little bit more interactive and to hear your voices, I would ask the first question of why do you think this is? Why do you think that Romania after the summer of 1941 is more of a reluctant participant in the Holocaust, while this is actually the height of anti-Semitic violence in the rest of Europe? There is no wrong answer, and feel free to, brainstorm with me here.
If you would like to speak, just unmute yourself. Like you don't have to do the hands because we can't see the entire gallery of participants.
And also, just as a note to self, you can always interrupt me and raise your hand during the presentation if there's anything unclear. That's absolutely fine. So to repeat the question, Romania is one of the first countries which really starts to systematically murder its Jewish citizens, but it's also one of the first to stop doing that already in the end of 1942. It stops the deportations in a mass way. And my question would be, what would be the potential answers to this? Of why would that be the case?
I have a thought and a question.
Mhm.
So potentially, in terms of thinking why that occurred, maybe they're seeing the writing on the wall potentially is the way the war is going by the end of 1942. So that's a thought. So to answer your question, but then I have a question. So you said here that 300 to 400,000 Jews were murdered in Romania. I'm just trying to keep the timeline straight. So that started, I don't know, 1940, 41, let's say, and ended by 1942. So they killed those in what in how many months basically are these 300 to 400,000 Jews being killed? Is my question. Like, what's the timeline for the murdering of these Jews?
That's an excellent question. So we're talking about the period of about a year and a half, and these deportations are conducted into a territory which we call Transnistria, which is not necessarily a concentration camp. It's more of an area which is, in the mind of the perpetrators, conceived as some sort of a dumping ground. So we're just deporting these people there and leaving them to wander these open spaces in a very harsh winter of 1941 without sufficient food, without sufficient means of survival. Some of them are shot in mass shootings in that territory, either by Romanian perpetrators or by German perpetrators who are just right across the border because they occupied the USSR. But a huge number of them simply dies of starvation and different illnesses, which does not exclude the guilt of the perpetrator who put them into that situation, right? So Holocaust in Romania is not the Holocaust as we know from German case of highly organized concentration camps or Holocaust by gas. It is a combination of Holocaust by bullets through mass shooting, or simply you would have cases of mass freezing to death of people who were dumped into a river, for example, because they were trying to be pushed into the Soviet territories and so on. And you were absolutely correct, Ryan, that there's multiple interpretations possible out there in the historiography. Most of them agree that Antonescu, the leader of Romania, analyzed the military situation and concluded that there's no way that Germany can win the war. And there was a shift in policy in that regard. But there's also people like sociologist Helen Fine, who argues for a more exotic interpretation, which I find very interesting, is that anti-Semitism is in some ways also a cause for the abortion of this policy, because in Antonescu's mind, and Antonescu is absolutely an anti-Semite, he's thinking that both the USSR and the democracies are ran by Jews in some way, shape, or form. Because of the conspiracy theory. And in order to have a favorable kind of negotiation position for Romania in the future negotiations with the Allied powers, the more Jews he kind of does not kill. It would be a bizarre to say rescues, because it's his own policies which are pushing the Jews to death. He's going to simply have a better hand. So Jews are becoming, in a way, a negotiation tool from his position for potential kind of negotiations in the future with the Allies.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
After 1942, do they continue to still keep them in like the concentration camps they have, but they're not systematically murdering or deporting them anymore?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So the murder does not necessarily stop in 1942, but the mass deportations do. And the mass deportations are again focused highly on these newly annexed territories, so not the heartland of the country. And we're going to discuss that later when it comes to Bulgaria and Croatia as well.
Lovro, there's a question in the chat for you
Mm-hmm.
from Donna, and she's saying, does this have anything to do with the fighting in the Soviet Union in 1942, or was there a regime change?
Absolutely, it's connected to the military situation in the east, quote unquote. Of course, the German offensive has kind of been stuck around Stalingrad for quite some time, and Antonescu has evaluated that also the drain on manpower and also the equipment on the German military is not showing a favorable turn or a quick capitulation of the USSR anytime soon, and therefore he is starting to rethink this policy. I'm sorry I cannot see the chat, so Sandra, otherwise I have to stop sharing the screen. So Sandra, whenever there is a question, please feel free to interrupt me.
Got it. Thank you.
Perfect.
I just want to say that maybe, Laura, they connect the Jews with the Russian communism, and that was the part of that, because the changes at the front at the Stalingrad and Moscow and everything else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Helen Fine is a very interesting thinker who says, even though anti-Semites are absolutely irrational in their belief in anti-Semitic myths, they are still very often show signs of being a very rational player and doing a cost-benefit analysis at the same time of what suits them and what can damage them and what is in their interest. And Helen Fine says you can actually turn anti-Semitism and against an anti-Semite through these methods, and shows Antonescu as one of these examples. Okay, so let's move on, not to run out of time. So overall, even though Romania had a fairly large proportion of its Jewish population survived, approximately 50%, by 1992, only 9,000 Jews were left in Romania. And we have to keep in mind, Romania had the third largest Jewish population in the interwar history. After Poland had the biggest, the USSR had the second biggest, and Romania was the third. Because of course, anti-Semitic policies during the Cold War, a lot of Jews emigrated from the country in the period of 1945 to 1990. Okay, so turning to Bulgaria and comparing it to Romania, and this was also done in some of the readings we had for today, Bulgaria really brings a very different starting point than Romania. Namely, its anti-Semitism in Bulgaria is much weaker than in Romania. It has a very weak continuity, and it's really located at the periphery of the society. Also, Bulgaria had high levels of integration of Jews into the society. A lot of Jews spoke the local language or were bilingual, and they were not in any ways really concentrated in any sort of professions. And that's why kind of the Bulgarian case shows a much more hands-on approach from Germany, which is kind of pressuring the country into deporting its Jewish population. And ultimately they succeed. So in 1943, Jews from the occupied territories, again, something that is very similar to the Romanian case, the old Bulgarian kingdom, going to the map and we'll come back, which is here in dark green color, is the Bulgarian kingdom before the expansion of the territory during the war. Jews from the old territories are not really deported to any concentration camp, but only Jews from the newly annexed territory of Macedonia and Thrace, the Greek and the Yugoslav parts of the country which were annexed by Bulgaria, were deported. And that includes approximately 11,000 Jews who were deported to Treblinka, German-controlled Nazi death camp. And King Boris of Bulgaria personally approved of these deportations, which is very important. There were also plans to include other Jews into the deportations, but they were never carried into effect because of the intervention of the church, the intervention of the intellectuals, and other actors in the society. Ultimately, around 80% of Jews survived the war under the Bulgarian control. And Bulgaria is very often framed as a savior country. You can find it in a lot of historical interpretations of Bulgaria being painted in a very positive light because of such high survival rate. However, also most of the Jews from Bulgaria emigrated after the war to other countries, mostly US or Israel, and so on and so forth. So when we compare very quickly Bulgaria and Romania, we can really see a clear pattern of two powers which are using the Holocaust to kind of solidify their national position, because the Holocaust is focused and concentrated onto the newly annexed territories instead of the kind of the heartland of the countries where Jews are discriminated. They're in a very bad position economically and so on, but they're not being sent to their deaths. And here we come to the third case, which we are going to discuss today, and which is very much a disruptive case in this regard, and that is the Croatian case. And why I call it the Croatian puzzle, because I'm going to outline very quickly what the problem for historical interpretation is, and also for education, and then we can compare it to Romania and Bulgaria as well.
May I ask a quick question?
Yes, go ahead, Wendy.
Thank you. The question I have is, on your last slide, you said that there was a large percentage of Jewish people that left in the 1950s. Why did they leave Bulgaria and emigrate if things were not so bad there?
So it's not that they were not so bad. They were so bad is always a very relative kind of concept, right? So what was the problem with a lot of Eastern European countries is that we have a surge of anti-Semitism in the 1940s and 50s. Which come from the regimes itself. And also there's a lot of rumors that the borders are going to be closed. So preempting the closure of borders in many communist countries, a lot of Jews decided to emigrate, not to get stuck behind the Iron Curtain in many ways. And this is a phenomenon that we can really trace across Europe. There are some regimes which are much more anti-Semitic, like in Poland, you have pogroms in the 1940s against Jews. You have show trials in Hungary and show trials in the Soviet Union, and that spills over to some of the other countries in the East Bloc. So in order to kind of preemptively protect themselves, seeing what's happening in other countries in the bloc, a lot of Jews left multiple countries from the Eastern Bloc. Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, so going back to the Croatian puzzle. On the left are kind of the reasons which are showing of why Croatia would be a very unlikely place where the Holocaust would be implemented radically. So let's go through some of these factors together. So first is also very high integration of Jews into the local community, very similar to the Bulgarian case. We have approximately 40,000 Jews in the independent state of Croatia, which we are going to analyze. There was also low levels of popular anti-Semitism in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and this is emphasized both by historians and by Holocaust survivors themselves in the post-war testimonies, that they did not feel anti-Semitism until 1941, when the state was established. There was also low levels of political violence against Jews in the interwar period in Yugoslavia itself, which Croatia was a part of. There's virtually no anti-Semitic pogroms, unlike in some other European countries at the same time. And also, anti-Semitism was not the integral part of the Ustasha ideological core. And the Ustashas are local fascists. That's just a name for the organization of the Croatian fascists. So Serbs were considered the central enemy of the Croatian far right in that period, because they were seen as a political elite which is running Yugoslavia, a multi-ethnic country, from the political center, which is Belgrade, located in contemporary Serbia. And the Croatian far right was thinking, which the Ustasha were a part of, that Croatia should secede from Yugoslavia, gain its independence as soon as possible, and also to eliminate the Serbian political elite on its territory. And moreover, we should also not forget that one of the strongest resistance movements in Europe during the Second World War was also on the territory of Yugoslavia. And these are the partisans led by Josip Broz Tito. So these are kind of the reasons which depict Croatia as a very unlikely, enthusiastic participant in the implementation of the Holocaust. And on the right are the results. So these are the facts that we know. First, that the mass deportations of Jews already started in Croatia in May 1941, and that the systematic murder began during the summer of 1941. Now, this is really, really early in the European context when we take into account, for example, that the mass deportations of Jews from Germany itself to concentration and death camps only started in October 1941, so several months before Croatia started implementing, before Nazi Germany, at least when it comes to what the heartland of the country is. Second fact that we know is that the Ustashas were the only regime in Europe, next to Nazi Germany and Romania, which implemented the Holocaust in its own territory through its own perpetrators and in its own death camps. It's worth to note, and this is something that Emil will discuss in his lecture, which is upcoming, is that the biggest concentration camp or the death camp outside of the SS jurisdiction, outside of the Nazi jurisdiction, was the Ustasha-ran death camp called Jasenovac, which we will mention later on as well, with approximately 100,000 victims, not just Jews. It includes other groups such as Serbs and Roma, Croatian anti-fascists, and so on. But this is really important to keep in mind when we are discussing the Croatian context. Also, approximately 75% of Jews in the independent state of Croatia were killed in Ustasha-ran death camps. So majority of killing was conducted on the territory of the state of the Croatian state, and also the destruction rate of approximately 75% of the Jewish community. So between 20 and 25% managed to survive. It's also worth keeping in mind different types of violence as well as timeline of the persecution against different groups. So it was not just Jews who were persecuted in Croatia, but it included a plethora of other minorities, namely Roma, Serbs, and others. So how can we come up with an answer to this Croatian puzzle, and where does all of this fit into the history of Southeast Europe? First, we have to look at the prehistory, pre-1941 period. So Croatia was a part of Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the territories, South Slavic territories, which were part of Austro-Hungarian Empire, marked here in light green and dark green, were a part of the new state, which was born in 1918, and this is the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. And this kingdom will just be renamed the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. So this is the same country as Kingdom of Yugoslavia. And there was a lot of grievances, especially in the Croatian political elite, that there were certain aspects of Croatian political autonomy which were given to it in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but they were lost in joining with the Serbia marked here in in pink, and Montenegro marked in yellow. So the entire interwar history was revolving around how to reconfigure this state, the newly formed multi-ethnic state, into something that would satisfy all of its ethnic and national minorities. Now, on the extreme right were the Ustasha movement, which was founded in the 1930s, in the context of really a severe political crisis in Kingdom of Yugoslavia. There were assassination attempts and also political violence against Croatian politicians and against other members of the political elite who did not kind of correspond to some of the leading elites in Serbia, and also vice versa. There was a lot of violence from Croatian extremists against Serbs, which also included the assassination of the king of the entire country, King Alexander, in 1934, who was killed in Marseille through the Ustasha actions. So what is this Ustasha movement really about, and what is their ideology? So the early ideology of the movement, which I trace in between 1930 and 1934, was focused on Croatian ultranationalism, xenophobia, and chauvinism, so universal hatred of any sort of foreigners, and also charismatic leadership, because the power was revolving around the figure who you can see on the right, and that is Ante Pavelić, the leader of that movement from its inception until basically the dissolution of the movement. And also, finally, the glorification of political violence. The Ustashas really believed that the employing political violence for achieving of any sort of an aim is fully justified, not only justified, but also a desirable means to filter the strong from the weak in their way of thinking. And the movement during the 1930s goes through a process of further fascistization and anti-Semitization. It adopts a lot of new values which were not there in the original political program. That includes anti-communism, anti-Semitism, anti-capitalism, anti-liberalism, and totalitarian aspects of its ideology. So the movement is already anti-Semitic, and this is very important before it comes to power, because a lot of the historians would sometimes argue that the Holocaust in Croatia was somehow the result of German pressure, or the Ustashas trying to position themselves in a favorable light to their Nazi allies. But the most recent research really shows that this is not the case, and that there is a continuity of anti-Semitism in its ideology from before the war. And we can also see how anti-Semitic they were in quantitative terms. This is a research that I've conducted for just one Ustasha newspapers. It's called Novi List, or the daily paper, which came out in between 41 and 45. And in 41, you can see, so only in the period between April and December of 41, there are 334 anti-Semitic articles in just one daily. So this is really a huge amount of anti-Semitic content which is being pumped into the society on every single day. And of course, there is a drop with time. And maybe my next question would be, why do you think there is a drop of anti-Semitism in the newspapers of a highly anti-Semitic regime? That gives me a good opportunity to have a quick drink break as well.
Maybe because also of the geopolitical things, but maybe also because there were not so many Jews in Croatia after those times.
Exactly. So Holocaust, as we will see in some of the later slides, is pretty much completed by the end of 1942. So the idea that you're going to solve the Jewish question as being sold as some sort of a way to entertain the masses or convince them that there is still an existing threat is not plausible anymore, because the Jewish communities have more or less already been eliminated in a very ruthless way. 80% of Croatian Jews are already either imprisoned or in debt by the end of 1942. So the relevance of the Jewish question also drops dramatically. It's not that they're becoming less anti-Semitic, it's just that one of the key political promises has been fulfilled. Okay, so we come to April 1941. In April 1941, the Axis invaded Yugoslavia, next to also attacking Greece. on the ruins of Yugoslavia, they created a new state, and that's the independent state of Croatia, which Nevi already shown in the mapping project, and it consisted of contemporary Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And it was created on 10th of April, 1941. So the Ustasha regime was built as a single-party system. It was a totalitarian state which used terror to suppress any political opposition. There was no parliament, no constitution, or anything of the sort. Also, considering that Croats made only 53% of the new state's population, the priority of the regime was to create an ethnically homogeneous state through genocide and ethnic cleansing, which targeted Serbs, 31% of the population, Jews and Roma, which together numbered approximately 60 to 65,000 people, and they were irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, but they were considered a racial enemy. On 30th of April 1941, the Ustasha introduced the race laws, which targeted Jews and Roma, and which were pretty much a copy of the Nazi race laws with slight alterations. But this does not also mean that somehow the anti-Semitism or the racial thinking was imposed on the Ustasha. They pretty much copied the know-how from or what was already put into practice in other countries, but this does not mean that it was not a genuine desire to solve the racial question in the states. And unlike the Roma and Jews who were targeted through the race laws, Serbs were targeted as political enemies and ethnic enemies and religious enemies as well. And besides mass murder, they were also exposed to deportations to Serbia to reduce the number of Serbs, and also through forced conversion to Catholicism. Which approximately also included 250,000 people were encompassed through these forced conversions. So this is the independent state of Croatia on the map of Europe here, which you've already seen before. And now I would kind of like to move into greater detail on how the Holocaust really developed. And before we do that, and that might also be useful for you to think in terms of sources you want to use and methods you want to use as educators, I'm going to explain the analytical framework really quickly. Because we very often think that genocides happen as soon as some sort of a regime or ideology or political elite takes over the control of the state, and therefore naturally follows the genocide. And this is not really how genocides develop. It requires really a lot of organizational work. It requires a huge amount of logistics to actually implement the genocide, and it includes a large mobilization of the population, both on the meso level, the mid-level organizers, and on the micro level to actually make that happen and make that work. So I divide perpetrators of genocide into three layers for the purpose of this presentation. First are the genocidal architects. This is the macro level, the level of the elites. These are those who occupy the highest positions of power in party or state apparatus. Then we have organizers of genocide. This is the meso level, the mid level, which composes of regional governors, mayors, chiefs of police, and so on. And finally, we have killers who are on the micro level. They're at the lowest level of the command chain also in some ways. And also in each genocide that we know of, there is also certain kind of regional variation. We have regions or places where the genocidal violence occurs much more radically, and we have regions or places which are falling behind. Therefore, we separate the perpetrators into genocidal outperformers, those who are spearheading the persecution, and genocidal underperformers, those who are kind of falling behind in this process. And I would like to show you some of the sources regarding this division. So first level is the macro level. We said architects of genocides, those who are planning it from the top macro level. And here I have the example of Eugen Didokvaternik, who is a person in Croatia performing the role most similar to Himmler in Nazi Germany. So he is the head of the security apparatus and head of the key security agencies. And he said during the war, "For me, Ante Pavelic, the leader of the Ustasha movement, was a demigod. Whatever he said, I listened, and anything he ordered, I blindly followed. When we victoriously came back from the emigration, this is referring to the 10th of April 1941 when the state was formed, Ante Pavelić decided that I should oversee the measures taken against Jews and Serbs. I immediately took this task without any hesitation, even though I knew that this implies my political death. I knew that after I implement these measures, I would never be able to go back into the political life. I knew what was the attitude of Jews towards the ideals of the Croatian people, and I was aware of the role which they have played for decades in the Croatian political life. I knew that this question had to be solved for the future of the Croatian people and the state. Someone had to sacrifice himself for it. Someone had to implement these horrible but necessary measures. And this short extract from what he is saying to a friend he trusts also shows the charismatic leadership that we just talked about, the kind of way of communication between the head of the state and a security official. It also shows the level of anti-Semitism that Eugen Dida Kvaternik has internalized by blaming the Jews for some sort of a role. Of course, all of this is false, because Jews are not any sort of a homogeneous political body, and they do not have any sort of a uniform political attitudes. There's also Jews who are extreme Croatian nationalists in this period as well. And also, what is quite important is to see this idea of historical mission and sacrifice among the perpetrators. The idea that they're willing to sacrifice anything to leave a state which is ethnically homogeneous behind. The same Eugen Dida Kvaternik has told another acquaintance of his that he does not care who wins or loses the war. What he cares about is that he's going to leave an ethnically cleansed state to the future Croatian generations. And this idea that you are worthless as an individual because you belong to some sort of an organic collective is an extremely important point to understand the thinking of the perpetrators. They do not think in a lifetime of 80 years, at least when we talk about fascists. They think in lifetime of nations, which is thousands of years, right? So one individual is absolutely sacrificable for the interests of the collective in the long run. And this line of thinking we really have to explain to students. Otherwise, nothing that the perpetrators are saying really makes sense in a way. So it's a different framework of even thinking about life and morality, which perpetrators really employ. So after receiving these orders from Ante Pavelić, the security apparatus under Eugen Dida Kvaternik, who we just spoke about, enters a very intense decision-making process. And in between June and July, a series of orders are given to security officials on the ground, which basically all say the same thing in different phrasings. So you have the leader who says very loosely in the press that he considers Jews collectively responsible for any sort of violence or any sort of uprising or resistance against the independent state of Croatia, and says that actions will be taken against them and they should be put under the open sky, which is a reference to concentration camps. Now, this loosely phrased statement by the head of the state is being implemented into orders by the security apparatus itself. And that security apparatus says through a series of orders, which are called July orders, that all Serbs and Jews should be immediately deported to concentration camps if they're suspicious as communists. And this is the most important order, in my view, for the implementation of the Holocaust in Croatia, because it discriminates for the same deed. So you could be a Croat suspect of communism, you would go into a prison and through the court system. But if you're Jewish or Serbian, you're immediately sent to a concentration camp. So we see sort of where the law, stereotypes and collectivist thinking kind of comes together into different outcomes for being suspicious of the same crime. And these orders are issued again also on 30th of July, insisting that there is no need for any material proof for someone to be suspicious of communism. So just your intuition of who you want to deport is enough. And after 30th of July, we really see a wave of deportations going across the country. Depending on some perpetrators, for example, deport women, children, elderly, all Jews into concentration camp after this order. Some people deport all men. Some perpetrators deport only 2 or 3 Jews who they think are suspicious of being communists. And what this shows us in this, Linda, Linda, we can hear you. Oh, okay, good. Sorry for the interruption. But what we see with the perpetrators is that there is really different outcomes on the ground of who takes what kind of an action. So the regime spends the next year really kind of filtering the perpetrators and almost educating them through various means on what it really expects from these perpetrators to do, and that is deport everyone. And this is what we see on the ground. So it's not that there is an ordered issue to everyone and everyone follows the same thing. No, we have to understand the genocide as a process. There's a lot of negotiation between the perpetrators also going on through the implementation of those measures. And last point that I would really like to make in terms of this macro, meso, and micro level is the ordinary people and genocide, and also how they behave during the Holocaust. This is an exceptional material for Croatia. We do not have high involvement of civilians into the Holocaust itself, but I do think these are important discussions which we should have with students. And that is the role of so-called bystanders or witnesses during the Holocaust. These are the images from the city of Osijek, and they depict demonstrations, anti-Semitic demonstrations in the summer of 1941. There was a series of these anti-Semitic demonstrations, and you can see ordinary civilians carrying signs which says, "Jews, communists, and Freemasons should be hanged." Or the other sign which says, "We demand forced labor for the guilty ones, the Jews." And also you can see the participation of women, of children. Here in this case, you can see children saluting with their right arm up here. Maybe it's not very visible, but I can assure you that you can see those cases as well, carrying anti-Semitic caricatures. And it's quite important to also understand the dynamic between the regime and the civilians. We think about totalitarian states and totalitarian regimes as having some sort of a one-way communication with the population, which is, coercion or secret police or atomization of the society. But actually, when we look at the regime interprets these demonstrations not necessarily as support for its policies. It interprets these demonstrations as demands for a much faster resolution of the Jewish question, which they have promised at the beginning of their reign. So it also shows how much of an influence the civilians or the witnesses or the bystanders, as we call them, but we should abandon this, can also have and can also be a way of co-creating or speeding up the existing policies, which can be genocidal as well. So ultimately, the Holocaust in Croatia, as I noted in the previous discussion we had, is an extremely fast process. It's overwhelmingly conducted in 1941 and 1942. So here you can see the percentage of Jews who were either imprisoned or killed in a specific year. 80% of all the victims of the Holocaust in the independent state of Croatia were either killed or imprisoned by the end of 1942. So by that time, the majority of the Holocaust victims were dead. And also when it comes to perpetrators, we can see, as noted earlier, that 75% of all Croatian Jews were killed by the Ustašas, 25 by German Nazis, and this was a Ustasha initiated action to deport them to Nazi concentration camps. And Italian fascists are basically not involved in the Holocaust as an act of killing at all. There's very few victims. Also, we are talking about Holocaust in Croatia as being a highly state-organized crime. 96% of Jews were killed in camps. So there's very little violence outside of the camps in terms of Holocaust by bullets or in terms of pogroms against the Jewish population in Croatia. There is violence, but it is not deadly and en masse as you would see it in Romania, for example, in certain cases. So to conclude, what can we see from these three cases, going back to the comparative part of the presentation? We can see that anti-Semitism is also not the best predictor of violence on the ground. So we have Romania, as we said, with the highest level of anti-Semitism in interwar Europe, which does participate in the Holocaust very enthusiastically, but it also stops in 1942. And then we have Bulgaria and Croatia, where this is not necessarily the case. Bulgarian Jews are deported in 1943, and in Croatia, violence is implemented in 42, by 42, the majority of it, but then the persecution still continues. So we have two regimes which are not very connected to anti-Semitism in the interwar period, but they continue to implement anti-Semitic measures during the war. And this is something that we should really address both in research and in education. The idea that we always borrow from Nazi Germany, there was high degree of folkish anti-Semitism from the turn of the century, and therefore Holocaust is a logical outcome. The cases from Southeast Europe very, very much complicate that question, and especially when we compare these three countries. Also, how can we explain the differences in geographic diffusion of violence, right? So as a reminder, Bulgaria and Romania are implementing the Holocaust very narrowly, only or mainly in the territories which were newly annexed, while the violence in the old kingdom, both in Romania and in Bulgaria, is very much confined. And this is a very, very important point, which has not been addressed in the historiography so far. While in Croatia, we have violence regardless of the regional differentiation. And this is a very big difference between Romania and Bulgaria on one hand and Croatia on the other hand, because Croatia much more follows the German model in a certain way than the other two countries. My potential explanation to this problem, coming back to the first slide which I showed, is to think about regimes. Do different regimes produce different types of violence? Does it mean that Croatia has a fully fledged fascist regime? Different violence in comparison to authoritarian right regimes, which are much more conservative, which think much more in terms of territoriality and solidifying newly annexed territories in ethnic terms, as opposed to fascism, which thinks about rejuvenation and revolutionary turnover across the society, regardless of geographic boundaries. Now, this is something really important to think about in terms of how regimes can impact violence. Also, it's quite interesting to think about absence, presence, or fusion of Holocaust by bullets, a period where violence was mainly implemented through mass shooting of Jews, and the concentration camps. Here again, Southeast Europe shows a very particular blend of the three or absence of some of them. So for example, in Croatia, we can see that bullets and concentration camps are fused because in Jasenovac, it is a concentration camp, but gas is not being used. Bullets are used as one of the main methods, and also cold weapons for mass murder. In Romania, we can also see that there was no usage of gas or gas chambers, but bullets are also one of the main methods, including the starvation and weather conditions that the victims were also exposed to. And then we have Bulgaria, where indeed Holocaust by gas was the main method because they were deported to German concentration camps. Here, I still think also that Southeast Europe presents a certain kind of difference than Nazi Germany, and it's also very interesting to compare in terms of education. Also, we have to keep in mind that Croatia, in this case, was also site one of the fastest genocides in human history, and this is the genocide against the Roma. So entire Roma population in the independent state of Croatia was killed in matter of weeks in the middle of 1942. One of the fastest genocides really in human history, that the entire ethnic group was killed in such a short span of time. And in that line, we should think in terms of entanglements between the persecution of different groups. What I mean by this is that the know-how, for example, that the Ustašas got from the persecution of Jews and Serbs was then applied to a different group, which is the Roma. And without that know-how, without the genocidal capacities which they have developed for other groups, they could not have ever implemented the genocide against the Roma as quickly as they did. And we need to include this entangled way of thinking, I also think, into other regions as well. I'm gonna stop here because we have about 10 to 12 minutes left, and I would still love to leave some time for the questions. So thank you for your attention, and I'm feel free to ask me anything about this presentation.